All right, welcome everybody. This video corresponds to page 98 in your course book, and the main topic is reported speech. So what we're talking about when we say direct versus reported speech, direct speech is the speech as it was actually said by the speaker, so we should put quotation marks around it. And here's a little example, and you can see I put quotation marks around the actual words of the president. I should mention this isn't a true quote, I just made it up, but I think he said something like this. Reported speech, on the other hand, is it could be quite similar to what was actually said, or it could be just a shortened summary of what the speaker actually said. So we don't use quotation marks, and it might look something like this. You can see the wording has changed quite a bit. So what is different between these two sentences? The first thing you might notice is the blue words, the verbs, have been backshifted. So that means the tense has been shifted one step back into the past. And you can also see that the pronouns have changed a bit. In this reported speech sentence, I've changed it to the actual person's name because I don't want to say his ratings. That might confuse the reader, thinking that I'm talking about the president's ratings, and I'm not talking about the president's ratings, I'm talking about this guy's ratings. So I used his actual name in the reported speech. And then also the president refers to himself as I. That would not be appropriate in the reported speech, so we've changed the pronoun to he. So backshifting the verbs, like I said, one step into the past. So go would be changed to went. Was going to, am going would be shifted to was going. Has gone would be shifted to had gone. Went would also be shifted to had gone. Was going would be shifted to had been going. Will go would go. I am going to would be shifted to I was going to. So I think that would probably be review for everybody. Let's look at this example from your book on page 98, and you can see that the presenter, the TV presenter, used the present perfect here, have noticed. As did the Linny. She also used they have grown. That's also the present perfect. So we can see in the reported speech it has been backshifted to the past perfect. Had noticed, they had, and they had grown. A couple other things you might notice. In the direct speech, we have the subject and the helping verb have been inverted because this is a question. But in the reported speech, the subject and the auxiliary verb are in kind of a regular order, as though it were a statement. So the idea is that this is no longer a question when we're reporting it. You might also know the word if. You might have noticed the word if here, and that's because this is a yes-no question that is being reported. So we could also use the word whether for this sentence. All right, well, let's move on. Modal verbs can also be backshifted. So will would become would in reported speech. Have to, had to. And if you're using the word must in the same way as the semi-modal have to, then Because must doesn't have a past tense, we would just use had to. May gets backshifted to might in reported speech, and can to could. These modal verbs don't backshift. And I guess the one I would like to point out is must. So here's a different use of must. When we're making a guess about something, for example, oh, she must be rich. When you're reporting that, you don't have to backshift it because this is making a deduction or a guess based on evidence. So, in the exercise that you're about to do, these are the reporting verbs that they ask you to use. So, let's talk about their meaning a little bit. So point out means we would use this reporting verb when the speaker has drawn the listener's attention to some fact that the listener may already know. Admit is used as a reporting verb when the speaker is acknowledging that they have done something wrong. Concede is used to report when the speaker is in an argument, they are acknowledging that the person they are arguing with has made a good point. Repeat, of course, is if the speaker is saying something for the second time. Remind is used if the speaker is drawing the attention of the listener to something that the listener already knows. Warn if the speaker is describing some danger. Stress is used as a reporting verb if the speaker is emphasizing some point. Conclude and predict. I don't think those really need any explanation. I think you'll figure out the meaning after you do the exercises. And finally, announce is used when you're reporting that the speaker gave some new information to a large group of people, for example, to the public. So, please try this exercise, number 2, on page 98, and you can check your answers at the back of the book. So now would be a good time to pause the video. Now, you might have noticed that exercise number 4, you might have gotten the answer wrong. It says the manager has announced that he intends to resign at the end of the year. That's on page 98 in your book. That's what the answer is. So instead of saying he intended, backshifting the verb, we say he intends. And the reason for that is given here by the first bullet point. It's a statement that continues to be true at the time of reporting. So that's why you didn't have to backshift that verb. It wasn't necessary. In fact, it sounds better if you don't backshift it. The second time you don't have to backshift the reported speech, the verb in the reported speech, is if the reporting verb that you use is written in the present perfect or in the present tense. So this would be done, for example, in this example. This is probably something that this woman says regularly whenever the topic of lying comes up. So that's why they're using says in the present tense instead of the past tense said. All right, back to this example here. I just wanted to point out that the word that is usually optional, but sometimes it can be better for clarity's sake. So the first one in this sentence I think could be deleted, but the second one, it really makes it clear that he would fire him is something that the president actually said and not Schwarzenegger. So in addition to just simple that clauses, there are some other patterns that we can use. But before we get into that, you might want to pour yourself a cup of tea and just let everything settle in for a bit. So if you want a break, this would be a good time to pause the video. However, I'll just keep moving on. And part B, it's called Alternative Verb Patterns in your book, page 98. What I'd like you to do is just work through exercises number 1 and 2 and 3. It's basically a lot of memorization work that you have to do. So these exercises are basically a test. Give them a try, check your answers at the back, and when you're done that, we'll have a quick summary. And I'll try to summarize the different patterns briefly for you. So go ahead and pause the video and give that a try. Alright, so number 1, doing something should, it corresponds to the verbs under C, as well as the verb recommend, and also the verb regret as well. I forgot to add to this table, but you can see it there on page 98, that regret follows this pattern as well. So let's look at an example here. Doctors recommend eating 6 servings of fruit per day. And let's take a look at number 2. So using the infinitive here with the preposition to, and that pattern can follow these 7 verbs that are on page 98. So let's look at an example. In this example, I'm thinking maybe it's a teenager who wants to sleep over at his friend's house, so he called his mother and father to get permission. Let's take a look at another example, or pardon, number 3. So we have here a direct object followed by the infinitive form of a verb, and it goes with these 7. And I put a star next to recommend because I think this sounds a little bit strange if we use recommend with this verb pattern. However, it is acceptable. I checked in a grammar book and it is acceptable, but we'll talk about this a little bit later. I think there's a preferred form that you could use. So going back to our example, he asked his mother to pick him up by car the next morning. This has a different meaning than the previous slide. Let's go back to that previous slide. He asked to stay at his friend's house. This is asking for permission. In this example, he's making a request. So he asked his mother to pick him up by car the next morning. So I wrote this example just to show you a small difference when we're using the verb ask. Small difference in meaning. So number 4, this is the tricky one. And let's take a look at an example. He asked that his mother pick him up by car the next morning. Same meaning as the previous one, so he's making a request of his mother. But what you might notice here is the subjunctive verb tense. So here the subject is his mother, and usually we would expect the verb to have an S on the end, but it doesn't. And that's basically all the subjunctive tense means, is that we use just the dictionary form of the verb, and that's it. The verb doesn't change its spelling at all. So I'm going to show you a bit of a complicated slide about subjunctive, but I think just follow my cursor and listen, and I'll try to simplify it for you. Oh, there it is. Okay, so subjunctive. We're just saying the verb doesn't take an S. And when do we use this verb tense? Well, we use it in that clauses especially in a formal style. I don't know if I agree about this, because American English is usually considered a little less formal. So I'd like to check on this. I'm not sure if that's true. And we use it in that clauses that are expressing an idea that is important or desirable. And some examples that this grammar text quotes are these 4 reporting verbs that we've just studied: suggest, recommend, ask that, and insist that. You would likely find the subjunctive verb form. So as you can see in all these examples, none of the verbs have an S. Also, instead of saying that he don't leave, we just say that he not leave. So we don't use do in the subjunctive tense. Also, you don't have, if the subjunctive phrase is referring to the past, you don't have to put ed on the end either. So basically, it's just a fancy word. It means use the dictionary form. So as you may recall, I was saying that I don't really think that using recommend with this style, recommend you to read a book, I think that's a little bit strange. I think this form would be more likely. I recommend you read a book. And I did a little bit of research just to check. So the research that I did showed me 200 sentences with the word recommend. And I was only able to find one example, which you can see here at the top, where recommend is followed by a direct object and then the infinitive form of the verb with the preposition to. The other 199 sentences, I couldn't find another example of that. And as you can see just on this little screenshot, the following 8 examples use the subjunctive form instead. So recommend, recommend plus the direct object plus the subjunctive form of the verb. So I do think that pattern number 4, the subjunctive form, this form is much more common with the verb recommend. So you will likely remember this a lot better if you do a little bit of practice. And we just took a look at 18 reporting verbs, and I'm sure you have better things to do than write 18 practice sentences. So why don't you try just writing one sentence for each of the 4 groups, and I would say, try to make it a memorable sentence, and if you can just remember that sentence, you should be able to remember the verb pattern in the future. So please pause the video and give that a try. Okay, the final part, again, just something that has to be memorized, but you can start by trying exercises in part C. So please pause the video and see if you can come up with the correct preposition for those exercises. And the answers are here. Basically, all I wanted to say is that these are basically just patterns that have to be memorized, and it's a good idea to keep a lexical notebook. Lexical just means vocabulary. And then this is a way that I would suggest you write them in your little lexical notebook. And then when you're riding the tram or waiting in line or something like that, you have some time to kill, you can go over the vocabulary that you've encountered in your book, and during our classes, any vocabulary that you think is new to you and may be useful, you should be writing it down in a book. Of course, another option would be downloading the app. It's a free app called Quizlet. It takes a little bit more time to make the cards on your computer, but the nice thing about that app is then you have some study material in your phone to use whenever you have a couple free moments. So if you have any questions about the material we've covered, or if you'd like me to check your sentences or share your sentences with another student, I'm thinking we'll make a little bit of time at the beginning of class on January 16th. And that should give everyone a chance to get through this video and try the exercises. All right, thank you for listening.